So money, even this conversation, it's heated, it's emotional, it's personal, it's complicated. It's so much more than dollars because we've got to realize that we have a relationship with money that started when we were just kids and that shapes our relationship with and our behaviors around money now. So, Jess, what's your money history?
People can see my face now,
Okay,
too.
I
You can
have
see my
consent
face.
to ask this question. I just
She
want to be
does.
clear.
She
But
does
it's
have
still
consent.
intense.
I didn't want to answer it, but, classic avoidance. I was like, ugh, okay, fine. When I was thinking about my relationship and kind of messages I received, I firmly believe that having divorced parents impacted my relationship with money. Now, I want to add the caveat that it wasn't necessarily the divorce itself. So, divorced women out there who are listening to this, please don't just hear the divorce. It was the way in which my parents went about it and essentially the hatred they had for one another. And so, my parents could not talk to one another about money. My mom would send my dad an itemized document every month that he would have to pay. And a lot of times I forgot about this until I was thinking about it. My stepdad would meet him at the local Chili's and go over it. My mother would not even have the conversation with my dad. Even when I'm telling this story, it gives me a little anxiety because I remember the animosity that was happening with them. And I learned really quickly as the youngest child how to take advantage of the situation in childhood. So if my mom would say no to it, I would just go ask my dad. And honestly, because they didn't like each other, a lot of times it'd be like, well, your mom said she wouldn't buy it. Okay, cool. I'll buy it for you. I'll one up your. Right. And it was used as a tool against one another. I remember my mom's comments about my dad, ripping her off or not giving her money. I mean, money was a very hot topic around me growing up, and it made me avoid even looking at it very young.
We share so much in that respect. My parents had a nasty divorce. And I do think, again, we acknowledge that this is complicated, that money was the way that they worked out their emotional distress against one another. And they fought about money the entire time that they had minor children, in and out of court. And it was constantly in my home growing up that we didn't have enough. And there was that blame, well, because I'm not getting enough from your dad. We'd go to the grocery store, and I remember very distinctly that she would say things out loud like, I don't know if this check is going to clear.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of, let's hope
yeah.
that and that's so stressful. And then she also loved to catalog shop. And I don't actually know because kids don't know what their parents, I don't know what those numbers look like. Maybe there was plenty of money coming in from her job and child support, and we weren't so close to destruction. And what she bought from the catalog wasn't that expensive. I don't know. But all I know is that there was a lot of tension, a lot of distress, a sense of money being used as a weapon back and forth, and just a sense that there wasn't enough. And I worried about it all the time. And I said, I started working when I was 14, and I always had a job, and I was always stressed about having enough money and stressed about having to ask for things that would cost money.
Yes. And I remember because money was used as a weapon, my mom would often say no, we can't afford that. And then my dad would then purchase it, which then fast forward to young adulthood. I will say, and I tell parents this in my office all the time, my dad bailing me out financially screwed me over and over because I never learned. But it was his way of showing love. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'd ask him nowadays a lot different questions than then, but he kept bailing me out. But I think he always wanted to be oh, but look, I love you more. I love you more. Here's this money. I can bail you out. And then my mom would be he hides money. I mean, it was so toxic.
It was so toxic. And then I think that we are one of the first generations of people who were able to go to college. There was an expectation that everyone would go to college, at least where we grew up in the suburbs.
Yep.
And this whole ability to get loans was really easy. And so I I work with people all the time who say, I can't believe my parents let me take out that kind of loan. And having loans for school was so stressful that I joined ROTC for
You
college.
did?
Mhm.
I never
Yeah.
knew that.
Oh, girl. Yeah, that's a story for another time. I ended up having to drop out and having to pay the US government money back.
Oh, I could
Thankfully,
talk
that
all
was the
day about
best
that
loan I
one.
ever got. But, again, having debt as a young person is a very stressful situation because we don't have these tools. And then we roll up into our marriages going, you're better than me. I'm bad with money. Those kind of messages become very internalized.
When I first started dating my husband, I was fortunate that I did not have to take out loans for undergrad.
Mhm.
It was covered and paid for. I
Yep.
very fortunate. And so when we met, we were very equal when it came to that. We did not have debt.
Mhm.
However, he had substantially more than I did from a financial standpoint.
Mhm.
Then when I decided to go back to grad school, well, then that did fall on me. I
Mhm.
did have to take out loans for that. And then I accumulated some debt, right? So we get into marriage, and I now am entering the marriage with debt, and he does not have debt. And I
Mhm.
think that can shift the power dynamic
Yeah.
real quick
It
when it's uneven like that.
it is. My husband had his college paid for and I didn't. I felt like a personal as a person, I felt like a liability
Oh,
from the beginning of our
mm-hmm.
relationship and just felt so much pressure. And he never made me feel like that. But I felt so bad and felt so much pressure and felt like I had this mark on me. And I know I'm not alone in that. That comes up all the time in therapy. Let's touch on just a couple of other events that could happen in your life when you're young that would impact a listener's relationship with values around and behaviors around money.
Well, when we talk about power and how
Mm-hmm.
money holds this power, I experienced this. I entered into my marriage with debt,
Mm-hmm.
and a year after lost my dad, who
Mm-hmm.
was not married. And so everything that was his became my sister and I's, which shifted the dynamic a little bit. Well, now
Mm-hmm.
I had no debt, and I was fortunate,
Mm-hmm.
and it shifted it. So really, really quickly. And it had kind of been talked about from a inheritance, but I mean, it kind of is yours. That's how we in our marriage look at it. Like your
Mm-hmm.
family's is yours, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it complicated things really
Mm-hmm.
early because we were in our 20s and I was a year into my new marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And it went from, oh, I'm feeling this way because I have all this debt to, whoa, now I don't have debt and I have this. And the power
Mm-hmm.
dynamic shifted really quickly. And I did not know how to handle that.
Yeah.
So loss of a loved one can be really, really a big shifter.
Yeah. And if when you're young, you lose a loved one. So let's say that your parents were always saving for what came next, and then your mom or dad died. You may go, why do we save? We should live, we should spend.
Mm-hmm.
Or like if you saw a parent have a devastating job loss and things became really tight, you might say, we can't spend any money. We need to have money saved up. It's the most important thing.
And I will say, as a woman, my history and what happened to my mother, right? My dad left my
Mhm.
mom for another woman, kind
Mhm.
of left her high and dry. And so that messaging, your parents' history with it, your family's history of do not ever put yourself in a position where you're that vulnerable.
Mhm.
That was the message I received. And I think
Mhm.
that impacts things
Mhm.
where it can change overnight. Do
Mhm.
not be vulnerable to that.
Yeah.
And that messaging, right, wrong, or the other, impacts these conversations that we have in marriages.
Mhm. Yeah. The messaging is everything. And then one more thing that really stuck out for me is if you were raised in a community where your money status was different than everyone else's around you. Like, I think the communities that we're raised in, the lifestyle that we're accustomed to, it impacts all of our behaviors, our expectations going forward. But when there was a mismatch, especially if everyone around you seemed to have tons of money and your family was struggling and it could even feel shameful, that can impact our behaviors and our values and our thoughts around money.
And the whole keeping up with the Jones, right? How old is that saying? And yet it
Yeah.
still applies.
Mhm.
Also, why can't I be the Jones? Just a
I
total
know.
side comment, but I want to be the Jones.
You're somebody's Jones.
You know what? That's a great point. That's a great point, my friend.
I cannot believe I'm saying this, but for the first time in Honest Women history, we have to stop our conversation in the
Oh,
middle. I know.
I don't like it.
I'm going to make you talk about this
I
2
feel so
times.
incomplete right now.
I
I
know.
feel so unsettled. I
I
don't
know.
like it.
Okay, well, let me give you one thing to take with you that might help.
Essentially, you're calming me down on our listeners right now,
I am,
to be
and maybe
clear.
our listeners. I don't know. It could be anything. So, this is the first step to having better relationship with and better conversations around money. It is identifying what your personal history is and trying to be curious about around how it's shaped your behaviors and your values. And to make this a marriage thing, that would be sitting down with your spouse and saying something that's very open and curious, like, what money lessons did you learn growing up? And you share yours, and you see if you guys can just come to the table with a little more understanding, a little more context, and a true commitment to the idea that no one is right or wrong about money. We just both bring really different things based on our experiences and our expectations.